Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Aaron. You enjoying the Tzurba?
So far, so
That's good. It's certainly comprehensive work, isn't it?
it's certainly an approach to it, isn't it? You know, they put a lot of work into it, I think.
Mm.
And we'll see what good things are on tonight. I'm just reading through the text, actually.
Yeah. In the West, did you ever come across issues where they struggled for a minyan?
From the time I was a little boy, we always struggled for a minyan.
Right. Because
And so I remember being told, I mean, I wasn't around then, I don't know how old I was, but I remember them talking about having a boy hold a chumash to make up a minyan. I do remember that.
well, I actually was a little boy, a 12-year-old holding chumash. I came from a shul which did struggle for minyan sometimes on Shabbat. And after I was 12, our rabbi, who was from Hungary, he was survivor of the Shoah and Hungarian Rav, and he came up with that. I don't know, he came up with that, but he certainly implemented that, and it came in handy so that you could lay in, people could say Kaddish. So it was used. I was one who was holding a chumash from the age of 12 on a number of occasions. But I missed the shiur last week. I'm not quite sure whether they got to the end of it or not.
But it's interesting that the criteria for making up a minyan are physical and not emotional or intellectual.
That's right. It's yeah. You can have someone who might have no knowledge at all, but I knew kids who were much more mature than me. I was a little kid, and I just gradually grew until probably 18, 19. But there were some kids who were, when they bar mitzvah, they were already fully grown and shaving and everything else. So they would have qualified, and yet I may not from that, on the basis of the criteria of 2 hairs and that.
Me too, 16. I see Debbie sent a message asking the rabbi whether we've got a Zoom session tonight, but I'm assuming we have.
I'm assuming also. Maybe I should send another message saying there are 6 of us here.
Maybe I'll just put the kettle on.
Oh, here we are.
Hello, sorry for the late start.
Hi.
This is where you're all hiding on Zoom.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to share screen for those who don't have a copy, and then we can follow on. We're in book 10, and we were discussing the halachot of who can join a minyan, and specifically we were discussing a katan, whether a minor, a child, can join a minyan, and that's what we were dealing with previously. And surprise, surprise, we actually saw there is an opinion, namely that of Rabbeinu Tam in the Rishonim, who says, based on what we saw in the Gemara, that under certain circumstances, the 10th person in a minyan, only the 10th, but the 10th person in a minyan can be a katan, a child who's under the age of bar mitzvah. And we are on page 20. 27. Is that right? No, forgive me. We are on 20. Yeah, we're on 20. We're end of 29. We did the end of 29 last time. We'll just start at the end of 29 again. We're on page 29. So we saw that there's the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, one of the obviously great ballet Tosafot, who had said that a child can be number 10. And we saw other opinions. That's where you were. We saw we're at the end of page 29. So no, you're sitting there. Sit. So so we saw that right at the end of page 29. We saw the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, who had said that you're allowed to. We also saw another opinion in Tosfot that not only can a child be number 10, but there was this sort of other middle opinion which said that a child can be number 10 if they're holding a chumash, but they're holding a sefer. Then it was sort of middle opinion in Tosfot. But then we ended off with seeing the position of the Ri, who said under no circumstances can we account a child for a minyan, even for number 10. And the Beit Yosef, which is what we sort of ended off with last time at the end of page 29, that's what we're going to see inside now. He also rejected this. That we don't. Let's see what he says. If we go back a page to Tosfot, back 2 pages, he had said that right? That was the end of page 27, right? There was an opinion in Tosfot who said and Rabbeinu Tam said it's minhag shtut. It's a ridiculous minhag. Either you can or you can't include a child. What is this sort of what the chumash elevates him? So the suggestion was the idea that he's holding a chumash means he understands what it is to who he's davening to. Then you know what's going on basically.
Rav Johnny.
Yes.
I was just mentioning to colleagues on Zoom before that I came from a shul in Melbourne, which when I was young, which struggled for a minyan quite often on Shabbat. And after I turned 12, our Rav, who was a Holocaust survivor and from Hungarian dynasty of Rabbanim, he had me hold a chumash on many occasions to help make the minyan so we could do Kriyat Torah and so people could say Kaddish. Now, the thing he didn't actually do a physical check to see whether I had a couple of hairs, or which is one of the criteria for someone who's mature, even though they may not be so mentally mature.
But we'll discuss that. That will get discussed later today, though. But we'll talk about Shat Adchak, and we'll talk about the time of great need, and we'll see the dispute in the poskim regarding this. But we'll see that there's basis certainly in Ashkenaz for doing this under certain circumstances. We already mentioned Rabbeinu Tam. Then there's the middle opinion in Tosfot about holding a chumash. But so let's go with source 9 here in the end of page 29. The Bet Yosef, right, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, before he codifies what to do in the Shulchan Aruch, he quotes this. And he cites the Rosh, who says that we don't do this. We look in source 9. The Rosh raised, right, the clearest of all the opinions is, you don't add him as a katan, a child, as number 10. The birkat hamazon of tefillah for benching for a zimun of 10 or for a minyan, until he has 2 pubic hairs. In other words, until he reaches physical maturity. We don't do this, and that's basically what we ended off with. That the consensus, the Rishonim, is not like Rabbeinu Tam, and that we don't do this. That's what we ended off with last time. If we go over the page, the question is then. Right, if we look at the Torah himself, who's obviously the commentary debate Yosef is on the Torah, in source 10, he also doesn't allow it, doesn't even mention the option of a child. In source 10, the Torah is obviously the sort of the precursor to the Shulchan Aruch. In source 10, he says, the chol davar shebekdusha, any matter of kedusha, of holiness, kagon kaddish ubaruchu kedusha, such of these things, ein omrim oto b'cham asara, you don't say it for less than 10. The elu asara, and these 10, they have to be free people, they can't be avadim, as we saw previously. They have to be adults to reach maturity and produce 2 hairs. In other words, they've got to be adults. Nowhere does he mention this leniency of the 10th person being a child. And the Shulchan Aruch rules based on what we just saw in his Beit Yosef. He rules this way in source 11, though he does cite the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam there, although doesn't follow it. So we see in source 11, he quotes it, but says we don't do this. It's not right. In source 11, the Shulchan Aruch rules. And this is where everything gets a bit hazy. Yesh matirin, there are those who allow, lomar davar shebekdusha betisha, that as long as you're allowed to say davar shebekdusha, like Kaddish, Baruch Hu, right, repetition of the Amidah, betisha with 9, but siruf katan, And number 10 should be with a child, shehu yoter ben shesh, as long as he's above the age of 6. And he knows whom he's davening to. That's the opinion we saw of Rabbeinu Tam. Says the Shulchan Aruch himself, though, "V'lo nir'in divreihem." This doesn't seem correct. Like Gedolei HaPoskim, meaning the poskim, the authorities don't agree with this. But who I did, the same thing is true. The Eved ve'isha in Starfin, we also know that an Eved and also an Isha does not count as part of the minyan. But see, what we see here, though, is that he categorically rejects the opinion which does exist, namely that of Rabbeinu Tam. And Haggah, the Ramah there adds, this is the important bit, the end of source 11, Haggah, the Ramah adds, Va'afilu al yidei chumash shebiyado ein letzarfo. Even with the chumash in his hand, i.e. the middle opinion we saw in that Tosfot, you don't join a child as number 10. However, the Ramah adds another sentence. Mihu, and this goes to what Jeff had said before. Mihu, however, the end of source 11, yesh no hagim lahakel b'shat adchak. There are those who do have the minhag to be lenient at a time of great need. Shat adchak, time of great need. How does one define Shat Adchak? That's a wonderful question. We're gonna deal with that in a moment. What is it that he's allowing for Shat Adchak as well? Because Jeff had mentioned holding a chumash, right? But are the words of the Ramah at the end here that there are those who are lenient at a time of great need? Is that saying at a time of great need if you hold a chumash, or is that even if you don't hold a chumash? The Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah had brought a couple of opinions. One was that the Shulchan Aruch had said that if you have 9 adults, as long as if number 10 is a katan, it's all right. But we don't do this. And then the Ramah had added, even if he's holding a chumash, we don't do this. However, and then the Ramah adds, however, at a time of great need, it's okay. So what's okay at a time of great need? Just a child or a child plus a chumash? So it depends what's he allowing at a time of great need, a child or a child who's holding a chumash. So the Mishnah Berurah understands that at a time of great need, he's saying even if you don't hold a chumash. If we look at, yeah, I'm going to turn you around so everyone can hear you. Yes.
The Eved and Isha makes the point that they can't be starved to a minyan. It happens on occasion, it's happened here, and I'm sure in other shuls, that you have, unfortunately, somebody who's not 100% mentally. Okay. What are the guidelines regarding that? Because I can think of instances where there has been such a person, and 1 or 2 people have said, "Oh no, he can't make him." What are the guidelines regarding that?
It's an interesting question.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sorry, the turntable didn't help. The question is that we spoke about, who cannot be included in a minyan. The question is, what about somebody who's not mentally all there? What are the guidelines in terms of including someone like that for a minyan? So there is debate around this, but there's discussion about everything, about who we define as what's called a cheresh or a shoteh. Somebody who's halachically a shoteh. Literally means somebody who's foolish, but it means somebody who's got no da'at. Somebody who's not a bar da'at. Somebody who's can't hold their own. So I mean, you have to take it case by case. I think circumstances, because there is discussions in the poskim. The discussions in the poskim, for example, about they discuss what is the halachic status of somebody who, for example, a child or a person who has Down syndrome, for example. Now, my wife is trained to work with autistic kids, with kids with Down syndrome. So I remember speaking to Shiur about this. You have higher functioning, you have lower functioning. So I think really these things have to be taken as case by case. They can't necessarily be an ironclad rule. I think it's very important to take these things case by case. So,
but Rabbi, in the extreme, I mean, let's say there is someone, not case by case, someone who definitely is, let's say, demented and has got no idea what's going on. Can that person be counted in mean if they're simply present?
You're saying if you don't know how to rule a case, what's the? Can you repeat the question again, Darren?
Oh yeah. So I mean, let's not take a grey area. Let's take black and white. Someone who's completely demented or doesn't have any idea that they're actually present.
Somebody who doesn't have any idea what's going on. I would be reluctant to count for a minyan. Correct.
What about someone who's had too much scotch?
Well, it's funny you said someone's had too much scotch because the poskim talk about somebody who's had a revi'it of wine, right? 86 milliliters of wine is under the category of shatui. They're not supposed to daven.
Okay.
So that's so you laugh, but there is discussion about it, and that's not necessarily for a minyan, but it's not supposed to daven themselves, not even part of the minyan.
See, there's an Indian here which I'm not sure people are conscious of, or sufficiently conscious of.
But Rabbi, can I ask
Right,
you?
1 second, Aaron's just a question here from Harry. Yep.
In the event that somebody comes to down to number 10, and there's some doubt as to whether he can or cannot, it seems to me you've got to be very careful about the individual, about causing embarrassment.
100%, and I
think about this because something happened, and somebody's doing that. Oh no, he can't join me.
well, no, that's not appropriate. I'll just repeat the question for the. Right.
Wow.
I'll no.
Imagine someone saying that.
So the question was, you have to be sensitive to also the person as well, and that's why I think one of the factors of, as I say, case by case, I'd say consult your local rabbi.
Okay.
So
You are a local rabbi.
surprise, yeah, sure. Yeah. All right.
The shoe fits.
Sorry.
The shoe fits.
No, no, I didn't say that. You did. So, but yeah, that's why these things have to be done. Each rabbi in the shul or whoever is appointed in place to answer shilas for each thing. It's very important that I think these things have to be done case by case. Sensitivity, embarrassment, understanding the community. These are all very important factors when you're dealing with the machloket, which on the one hand is very sensitive and also depends on the needs of the community as well. Okay, so let's move on just regarding this. Okay, so when is this Shat Chak? When is this time of great need where according to the Ramah you're allowed to include a child as number 10? And does he have to be holding a chumash? So let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says in source 12. So the Mishnah Berurah says that this, we'll see, he brings the different minhagim, and he says that many disagree with this Ramah. So even though the Ramah brings it, based on what we saw about Tam, many don't like it, as we've already seen. Source 12, Mishnah Berurah says, Uvilvush katav, so the Vush wrote, one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, Shalo ra'an nohagim letzarfo afilu b'shat chak. That he never saw the minhag that they would add a child as number 10, even at a time of great need. They never did such a thing. And we saw that Riyad already paskin that way, right? And the Shulchan Aruch himself. Uviz manenu, and nowadays as the Mishnah Berurah, nohagim letzaref katan alidei chumash shebiyado. So there you go, Jeff. So the Mishnah Berurah says that that in his times, the Mishnah Berurah's times, they do, in a time of great need, add a child as number 10 if he's holding a chumash. Well, Miyu, however, he says it's not for everything. Dafka lishma baruch hu v'kadish shehu chiyuv. They only do this for baruch hu and for kaddish. And by this kaddish, it means the kaddish, like kabel, the main kaddish. Aval kaddish achar aleinu lo yomru. But the kaddish after aleinu, which is Aimuna's kaddish, no. In other words, they do it for the kaddishes they really need. The baruch hu and the kaddish tit kabel, the kaddish shalem, that you do after Shmona Esrei, which we do after Uvalut Tzion at Shacharit, or after Tachanan at Mincha, or after, but those are the ones. In other words, the things which are inherently necessary for Tefillah B'Tzibur, but the extras we don't do. In other words, the Mishnah Berurah is saying we don't like it. Right. Presumably he would include those as well, but you're right. It's not clear. But he talks about chiyuv, like the things which are absolutely necessary. Strictly speaking, it's not necessary to say kaddish yatom, right? Say mourner's kaddish, although obviously we do it for important reasons. Strictly speaking, not mourners, orphans, correct. Bad translation. Kaddish yatom is the whole point. Ironically, the kaddish was originally said by children because they couldn't daven from the amud on the outside. So Chazal made kaddish yatom, right? More orphans kaddish, right? Because they're not bar mitzvahs, they can't daven on the outside. So instead, they recite kaddish. That changed, and now more people say kaddish than actually daven on the amud. So it's sort of things have changed over time. But sorry, and it's only meant to be one at a time. But the Sephardi minhag took over Ashkenaz, and now, unless you go to a couple of random shuls like Monks in London, where they'll still insist that only one person says kaddish at a time. So, right, of course, all the Yekish shuls, one at a time. Yeah, my dad found out the hard way in London. My dad found out the hard way. They had a family simcha on Shabbat, and then he went to London, and then they shushed him. Yeah, so, yeah.
In the winter, when the
but that's not. Sorry, didn't get the memo. Tell me about it. But I say, thank God that minhag seems to have been lost from Ashkenaz, and we follow the Sephardi minhag because multiple. No, you try to tell one Israeli one at a time, doesn't work. Does not work. Absolutely not. So Wait, before the Lavush said that the minhag didn't exist even in the time of great need. Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi. Europe. But over the page, the top of the end of source 12, over the page in the bold. This is where the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah says, despite what we saw in the Ramah, and despite the fact that there's a minhag to do it, that many achronim are machmir not to join any child, even a time of great need, and until he hits bar mitzvah, until he's 13 years old. So even though we saw Shatat Chak, the Ramah was lenient for Ashkenazim, nonetheless, the Mishnah Berurah says many achronim absolutely rejected this. Moshe Feinstein came along and dealt. Sorry? Many does not mean most, you're right. But many did not like it. The Shulchan Aruch himself rejected it, and many achronim of Ashkenaz also rejected it, although the Ramah had brought it. Now, Moshe Feinstein had to deal with this. Various sort of minyanim all over America, but they're not very established communities. And if they didn't join a child as number 10, then there simply wouldn't be a minyan. So the question is posed to Moshe Feinstein in the Igrot Moshe in source 13. He discusses this. In source 13, he says, "B'davar regarding the matter of im yesh lahachshiv shatat chak, is it considered shatat chak a time of great need? B'im alidei shelo yitzarfu et hakatan leminyan asara letfilah, that if they don't count a child as number 10 for davening, yesh lachushi batel haminyan chas v'shalom, that the minyan will basically not take place if they don't count a minyan. They don't count a child as number 10. Does that count as shatat chak? I.e., there's not going to be a minyan in town. Pashut is obvious. Obviously, the suspicious person who wrote the question is absolutely right. That if the minyan is going to get cancelled because of it, that is considered absolutely a time of great need. Not only if that's the only minyan, but even if there are other minyanim in town. It says, even if in that town there's another shul where the daveners are able to go, still that's considered shatat chak. Why? Mishum, because the way of things, because right, you might live in between Mizrachi and Caulfield, right? But other people might live the other direction, and for them it's far, and they won't actually go to Caulfield if there's no minyan Mizrachi. V'gama krovim, and even those who live close, gam l'sham, even if they live close, yesh lachush, you should be concerned, shelo yelchu lemakom she'ein regilim. Let's be honest. We don't go to that shul, right? That's the shul we don't go to. This is the shul we do go to. So once you cancel the minyan in your shul, who's to say that they're actually going to go to a shul that they don't typically go to, they're not used to going to? And they will basically refrain and miss davening with the minyan, Torah, and will miss laning. And answering all the divrei shebek kedusha, right? All the divrei shebek kedusha. They miss kaddish, they miss baruchu, they miss kedusha, they miss chazar tashatz. So even if they do live close, who's to say that they're going to go to the other shul that they don't typically go to? And he goes further. He says, and even if you're going to tell me, don't worry, we're all going to go to the other shul, still, if they don't go to that shul anymore, and that shul basically gets shut down as a result, or whatever it is, then all the shiurim which take place in that shul are also they're not going to come to Tzurba either. And even if there are shiurim in the other shul, that you don't necessarily succeed in learning from everyone. Meaning there are some people who you connect to, and there's some people you don't connect to. And it's best not to end up cancelling shiurim in order to boost other shiurim. So he says, not only is it, we're not just talking about a case where that's the only minyan in town. Even if there are other minyanim in town, and people will go to them, nonetheless, you want to strengthen each shul, and therefore it's considered shatat chak if the minyan is not going to take place because you don't count this child as number 10.
Can I ask you, is there any discussion anywhere regarding the question of you have 8 mevugarim and you need 2 juniors?
Yes, we saw already that this rule, this heter, is only a heter regarding number 10. That's what we ended off with last time. The Rosh had said that because the idea is that the vast majority of the minyan, it's just the miut shebamiyut, the absolute minority is number 10. But we're only talking here about one of them can be a child. And he says, don't worry. Yeah, was that?
I was just going to say, if you go back and look at the Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't just say shtam a 6-year-old or a young child. It says one who actually understands before whom he's praying. And I think that's really an important rider to the notion of a child. I mean, you see some kids who are, 6 years old and they've been brought up from the cradle, understanding that when they're standing in shul, they're standing before a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and you get 12-year-olds who have got no idea of standing before a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and the text so far seems to be talking about specific markers, and you mentioned sort of taking a case-by-case position on someone who's a tippish, and not a case-by-case on people which have got physical things. And I think it's really important to take note that they're talking about someone who actually understands he's standing before a Kodesh Baruch Hu when he's praying.
I accept. Okay, I hear what you're saying. But the idea also is question here, we're talking about sort of religious knowledge, or we're talking here about intellect. Meaning, is somebody who can understand that we're standing before Hashem, or is it how from they are? Meaning, you can have a 13-year-old or a 30-year-old or an 80-year-old who doesn't really understand, what it means to daven before Hashem, but they understand, okay, I'm praying before God, whatever that means. So I think that's also important. We're talking here in terms of the intellectual capacity of the person to understand the task which is before them. I think it's more from an intellectual perspective rather than a religious one, although obviously that's important as well. Okay, so let's,
in the case that I described, the Rav only applied it to people once they were 12. So if when I was 11, I never did it. I never held the Chumash, but he never allowed. But once I turned 12, and I presume, and there were a number of Shabbatot in which we lacked that minyan, and they were able to proceed with it. So, and they only had a Shabbat minyan throughout the week on Friday night and Shabbos morning. So, it's just interesting.
So again, we'll see that there might be another reason to also be elect, because it could be the physical maturity as well as the age. So that's why we wait till sort of 12. That might be a reason as well. But just to end off here again with a Moshe Feinstein's tshuva, the last paragraph there in source 13, he says, those who are lenient, don't feel bad to be lenient, because Hem Gedolim, there are great authorities, Shu HaRav Hai Gaon, HaRif, HaRazar, right? That's the Balam Ar, Rav Zerachi Alevi, Rabbeinu Tam. So he says, not just Rabbeinu Tam, it's really a multitude of Rishonim. Ach Bakan Harov Haim, although it's true that here the majority are those Shesarim She'enam Mitzareh. Although the majority of poskim say that you can't include a katan as number 10, but and therefore Ashu Rak Midrabanan, even though it's the Din Drabanan, nonetheless, Yesh Lifsot Kaharabim, we pass like the majority, Kadisa Barama, like the Ramah says there. Aval, but in Ken Ha, but here nonetheless, what's happening? When it's time of great need, Yesh Lismoch Hadat Yachid Besud Drabanan. You can rely on the lenient position when it comes to a question of Isra Drabanan, even though it's the lone position. So he is Mekel, like the Ramah, in a time of great need. And he says a time of great need is even if in that shul there's going to be no minyan, even if there are other shuls in town. But not everyone accepts this. Rav Ovadia Yosef rejected this, and it's not surprising because we saw that the Shulchan Aruch, again, Rav Ovadia is the Shitato, he's consistent in his methodology. And if the Shulchan Aruch passes this way, he's not going to move from it, lo yamin v'lo smol, right? Lo zaz, from our Shulchan Aruch, and that's what we see here in source 14. And he is really unhappy about it. He says you should object to such a minyan. You should refuse to take part in such a minyan. Let's look at in source 14. He says, Maskana de Dinah, the conclusion of the bottom line, the halacha is, Shebakfarim v'yishuvim, little villages, ktanim, little villages, she'ein sham asra gadolim, they don't have 10 adult men, umuchrachim, and they need, necessarily, they're compelled, so I just have to go over the page, and it's frozen, umuchrachim, there we go. Letzaref katal asra. They have to join number 10. That's the only option. A child to be number 10. Afal pichen. Even so, ein lahatir bezeh lasot maaseh neged dat maran. There you go. You cannot paskin against maran. Right. The Bet Yosef Shulchan Aruch. Shekibalnu. Right. Kibalnu hora tov. We have accepted upon ourselves his halachic authority. Shesover, as he holds, as we saw previously, the Shulchan Aruch she'afal pi, the even she'afilu b'shat al-chag, the even at time of great need, ein hakata mitzdaref for the minyan. The child cannot join the minyan. Lomar kadosh shefusha. V'chen, and similarly, le'inyan created Torah regarding laning, ein hakata mitzdaref asra. You cannot do it. And not only that, but he goes further, as I said, after the 3 dots there. And if you see that the consensus is that the people there want to be lenient and join as number 10 a child, listen to this, so anyone whose heart has been touched by God, he should leave the minyan. He should not daven with them. That there shouldn't be like an incident or a misfortune by his hand. They making brachot in vain because of the chazara of the Shmoneh Esrei, chazara to Shatz. And right, you should not join that. Your glory, your honor should not join such a minyan. He says not only should you should not do it, but you should object. You should walk out if they do it. So he does not want to accept the psak of the Ramah. Not surprising because the Shulchan Aruch said explicitly otherwise, and he follows the Shulchan Aruch. But he gives no quarter. He says absolutely not. But even Ashkenazi poskim say this way. We saw the Mishnah Berurah said many Achronim don't allow it, but more modern Ashkenazi poskim, Halichot Shlomo, right? Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is also as recorded as having paskin this way that you cannot allow this even at a time of great need. We look at source 15. Yeah.
If we go to the Moshe Feinstein,
so Moshe Feinstein allowed it at time of great need, but we're saying on the other side, Rav Ovadia said absolutely not. You have to walk out. And also Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, another Ashkenazi posek, albeit in Israel, also says you cannot allow this.
Just to drill down to Moshe Feinstein.
Yes.
So how do you understand Moshe Feinstein that the child has to hold a Chumash or he doesn't have to hold? And also,
does the child have to hold? According to Moshe Feinstein, does the child have to hold the Chumash?
And also,
let's
is
see
it
what it says
limited
inside.
to the Kaddish and presumably the Kedusha and Baruch Hu, or would it include the Kaddish Yatom? Or would Rav Moshe hold, according to the opinion that says we don't say Kaddish Yatom?
I think Rav Moshe Feinstein was talking generally, I believe.
Generally means what?
Generally meaning throughout the entire dub.
The entire dub.
Yes.
And
We'll see inside. I think he included Kaddish Yatom as well.
And regarding the Chumash?
The Chumash, I don't recall he mentioned inside. I have to see the full tshuva inside, but here it doesn't seem that he mentioned a Chumash. He just says to include a child.
Okay.
And he mentioned the idea about, he said Tefillah b'tzibur and laning as well. Laning is also a big deal. He says laning as well. I don't think he included there Chumash. We already saw, because if he's relying on Rabbeinu Tam doesn't require a Chumash.
Interestingly, you're allowed to, understand you're allowed for someone to leave the room and have 9 people. Is it correct? Like a minute of 10, then they're doing shots.
So you're not allowed to, if there's a minyan of 10, you're not supposed to leave the room. If a person does walk out in the middle of Chazrat HaShatz, you're allowed to continue with 9, at least until the end of Chazrat HaShatz. And then assuming there was a minyan there, you'd also be allowed to say the Kaddishes, and you'd say the Kaddish, Chatzi Kaddish, and you'd be able to say the Kaddish Tit Kabal, the Kaddish Shalem, because that's connected directly to the Amida, because it's saying, but you can't do Kaddish Yatom, you can't do more Kaddish after Alem. Yeah, but and then the Shulchan Aruch says like that person who walked out is big trouble, not good for his soul. So he has what to say about it.
Unless you can,
But
just to make the chance so they're good.
yeah, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to walk out. So it's a big deal. That's why when Rav Ovadia says you're supposed to walk out, it's a big deal because he thinks the minyan doesn't count. So you're not really walking out of minyan according to Rav Ovadia. There is no minyan in the first place. That's why he says you can walk out.
What would you say? Not only you're preventing yourself,
You're preventing the entire minyan from doing a bracha levatala. You're stopping the minyan, right?
But according to his svara, I understand. He says it's done at a kosher minyan.
Absolutely, it's not a kosher minyan. You've got to walk out. No, you can't join such a thing. You can't. They think because you're there, it's a minyan, and it's not. But let's see. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach ruled similarly in source 15. He didn't say about walking out, but he says you shouldn't rely on this opinion. He says in source 15, "Ein letzaref katan leminyan." You cannot join a child as the minyan klal at all. Af even im al yedei bitul haminyan b'pam hazo yipatel haminyan od pamim achadot. Even if by cancelling the minyan this time, it's going to cause it to be cancelled other times. So it's not going to help us with the 7 o'clock minyan. Okay. So Dvar halacha there in the footnote there in the Harat Tetvav, he says Kugon, for example, shad tzibur maskim b'koshi lehitasef, right? For example, lehitasef letfilah b'tzibur. Like they agree, they more or less agree that they're going to gather together for a minyan. And nonetheless, you still can't do it. And therefore, if they're not going to join you now, this child is number 10, they're going to become negligent from joining again. So meaning you want to show them that, look, there's a minyan here, by having number 10 as a child this time, so that they'll say, oh, there's a minyan, and more people will come in future. That's also included that which the Mishnah Berurah had said, but the Achronim said you're not supposed to include a child even at a time of great need. So he does not allow it. And modern day authorities in general are not happy. We saw Moshe Feinstein was lenient though, and the Sheva Halevi Rav Vazner is also lenient if there's no minyan otherwise, if there's no minhag otherwise. So we see in source 16, right? Sheva Halevi, also another posek from Israel. Omnam, however, heyot ki halacha zo mufpeket ma'od, as this halacha is very questionable. Ugdole hara'a lo nichalahu klal b'minhag, and the great poskim are not happy at all with this minhag. Shel tziruf im chumash, gam eshadat chak, including a child, also with a chumash, even at time of great need. V'im nahagu nahagu, if that's the minhag, that's the minhag. Ava b'kriyat haTorah lo shamanu, he doesn't extend it to leinik. He says he won't allow it for leinik. If they do it for other things, chazar hashatz and the like, seder. But we shouldn't do that, ideally. So in some sense, you do have here a little bit of a split between the poskim of Eretz Yisrael and Moshe Feinstein in America. That the poskim are pretty united that it's not really good in Eretz Yisrael. Maybe, who knows, because you can always call off a number 10 off the street. It's much easier to do in Israel, perhaps, than it is in Chutz La'aretz. But Moshe Feinstein was lenient, and Rav Dalia Dov Schwartz was also lenient if there's not going to have a minyan in certain circumstances. He was the based in it was, I think, in the CRC Chicago, and then eventually in the RCA. He passed away a couple of years ago, and they quote here safe in English in source 17, and he discusses this again in Paskening in America, and he says as follows. Ramah even understands that the katan should not be counted in source 17, even while holding a chumash, unless it's shatat chak, a difficult situation. However, in practice, many other decisors rejected the ruling of counting the minor under any circumstances. So that's what we saw, right? That many of the modern poskim reject it, and also the Mishnah Berurah said many Acharonim reject it. But he continues. Many American rabbis in various communities were faced with the problem of bringing together a minyan, and some felt the need to rely on a lenient opinion. And presumably that's also what was driving Moshe Feinstein's up. He says, however, it's been pointed out this leniency should only be used where the community does not have 10 qualified males at all. If there is an adequate number available, but it's just a neglect to come to a minyan, the minor should not be counted, since the members of the community are obligated to participate with full cooperation. So he's not as lenient as Moshe Feinstein. Moshe Feinstein seems to allow it. He says you should only allow it if there are people in the minyan that are just not coming back to shul. Right, they're still scared of COVID or whatever it is, or just they're not getting up. You can't rely on it. It's only a place where in the middle of nowhere you've got your minyan, the Midwest or whatever it is, and there's no one there. That's when you can rely on it, and there'll be no other minyan in town. But if there's a town where there are other Jews living, they're just not coming, or members of the community, they're just not coming to shul, you should not rely on it. So that's some background regarding the different positions there, and we've seen there's opinions and extremes on each side. Okay, so we referenced a katan, but the question is not only a katan, but when exactly does a katan become a gadol? At what point do we say they're no longer a katan, they're a gadol? So there's two questions here. One is the question of physical maturity, and the other one is beyond the question of physical maturity, is the question of not just physical maturity, but in terms of age, objective age. Because we know this idea of bar mitzvah 13 as well. So where's this concept of age versus physical maturity? How does that come into play? So we're now on page 34. What age when we constitute a katan for a minyan? When he stopped being a katan? And the Mishnah in Nida talks very much about it being a physical thing rather than an objective age in terms of when a person stops becoming a child. We look at source 18. The Mishnah in Nida says as follows: Tinoket shehavia shtei sarot, right? A child, a young girl who's brought 2 pubic hairs, or choletzet, or mitya bemet. The minute that she reaches maturity, she can perform chalitza or yibum. In other words, if she's physically matured, she is now an adult. And similarly, tinok, a young boy, shehevi shtei sarot, who has brought forth 2 pubic hairs, chayav b'chol mitzvot hamorat b'Torah, is obligated all the mitzvot in the Torah. In other words, it's defined by physical maturity, not by objective age. There's no mention here of an age of 13 in the Mishnah. The Mishnah goes further, not only in terms of they're obligated in mitzvot, but also ra'oi lihiyot ben soreh more.
We lost him.
Frozen, eh?
Yeah,
Oh, there you are.
there I am. We're talking about
The
a
Russians have done
young
it.
girl who, sorry, internet connection. Talking about a young girl. When is it she becomes an adult, such that the rules of Yibum and Khalis would apply to her when she's a fully-fledged adult. So the Mishnah only mentions physical maturity. It doesn't mention objective age. What matters is the criteria of physical maturity.
So once she's in Bulgaria, once she shows who is, it's not just that she can be involved in Khalitsa or Yibum. She can marry anybody she wishes. Right, her father or brother no longer have control of her.
Yes, she can marry whoever she at that age. Correct. Correct. So the Gemara there talks about physical attributes in terms of deciding age. If we look over, did I miss a page? 1 second. Where are we at? Okay. We're on page. What page are we on?
That looks like the page we're on.
Does it like the page we're on? We're on page 34. Okay, I went over a page. 1 second. Sorry, it's modern technology. No, page 34. Here we go. Okay, so we saw the Mishnah inside. Okay, now we know that the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot mentions this age of 13, like Ben Shlosh mitzvot. That when a person reaches 13, then a person is obligated in mitzvot. But that was not mentioned in the Mishnah we just saw, but rather physical maturity was mentioned. If we go forward, so where does this measurement come from of the age of 13 for a boy and also for adulthood 12 for a girl? So the Rosh over the page in one of his Tshuvot discusses this and in references what we just saw in Pirkei Avot. It's not brought here, but Ben Shlosh mitzvot. This idea of 13 being halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that it's a law given from Sinai, like many of the midot, like many of the halachic measurements, which are not written explicitly but are through Masorah. We look in Surah 19. The Rosh says, "V'shalta," as you asked, "Me'ayin lanu." How do we know the ben yud gimel shana v'yom echad hu bar onshin? How do we know that a child from 13 years is considered liable for punishment? Ava pachat miken lo. But less than this, no. In other words, who says 13 years old is the cutoff point? The Rosh responds, "Da, no." Ki halacha leMoshe Sinai. It's halacha of Moshe from Sinai. V'hu bichlal shiurin chatzitzin u'mechitzin. It's part of, now that the Gemara in a couple of places talks about, in Sukkah and elsewhere, talks about the idea of shiurin, measurements, chatzitzin, obstructions, what's considered chatzitz, umechitzin, and what's considered a halachic wall. These are the three categories which are given as halacha l'Moshe from Sinai. So obviously shiurin, measurements, also includes age shiurin, which is halacha l'Moshe from Sinai. So the Rosh that concludes at the end of Surah 19. The shiur v'kitzba l'chol davar nitan l'Moshe bal peh. That that everything was given to Moshe orally at Sinai, and the age of 13 comes under the category of shiurin. Shiurin measurements were given to Moshe at Sinai, and that's where 13 comes from. And the question is, when is it that we do rely on it? Because we have these two measurements. We have an objective age, 13, and we have physical maturity. And they're both sort of passed around. And do you need both? You need one. Does one indicate the other? What about somebody who's reached maturity below the age of 13? So the Gemara in Kedushin addresses it and says that somebody who's achieved maturity below the age of 13, according to one opinion, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. So if a person's reached sexual maturity below the age of 13, it does not matter. They're still considered a child because you need both. You need the 13 as well as the physical maturity. We look at source 20. It's the Braita says as follows. The Tanyas, we learn the Braita in source 20. Ben teisha shanim she'evi shtei se'arot. What about a 9-year-old boy who has developed 2 hairs? Shuma. We consider the hairs shuma. Shuma means a mole. In other words, it's just like the hairs on a mole. In other words, it's just hairs which have no significance to determine maturity whatsoever. Meben teisha shanim v'yom echad. Va'ad ben yud beit shanim v'yom echad v'odan bo. What if he has hairs, but he's between the age of 9 and 12? So according to the Tanakama, according to the first opinion, Shuma, again, it's just like the hair on a mole. In other words, It's not relevant. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, siman, it's a sign, it's an indication of maturity. So according to the Tanna Kama, if they're below the age of 13, reaching maturity is insignificant. They have to have the age of 13. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Ben Yud Gimel Shana v'Yom Echad, but once they hit the age of 13, Divrei Hakol Siman. Everyone agrees that it's a sign which indicates maturity. But we see though, prior to the age of 13, reaching maturity is irrelevant according to the Tanna Kama. According to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, between the ages of 9 and 12, it does mean something. But according to the Tanna Kama, it does not. And the Shulchan Aruch rules like the Tanna Kama, rules like the first opinion, that you need the age of 13 and reaching maturity prior to that is irrelevant. Look in source 21, the Shulchan Aruch says, La'olam, always, hu katan, he forever remains a child, ad sheyavish beit sa'arot, until he produces 2 hairs, achar sheyeh ben yud gimel v'yom echad, after he's reached the age of 13 and 1 day. In other words, a child has to be 13. Now, it's interesting here that it mentions 13 and 1 day. That seems to imply it really has to be the day after the birthday, or it has to be 13 complete years. But the Mishnah Berurah says it's lav dafka. It doesn't literally mean it has to be 13 whole years. And therefore, so what happens if a child was born in the afternoon, right? The boy was born in the afternoon. Can he get an aliyah that morning on his 13th birthday? Mixas hayom kechula, like we say that in Aveilot in certain circumstances, a part of the day is like all of the day, but it hasn't been 13 complete years, right? Because he was born in the afternoon. So it's his birthday, but it hasn't actually been 13 complete years. So the Mishnah Berurah is lenient and says that you can have an aliyah in the morning, even though he was only born 13 years ago in the afternoon. You can count for a minyan the night before, even if he was only born in the evening. If we flip over the page in source 22 on page 36 now, Mishnah Berurah says, V'yom echad. So because the Shulchan Aruch used this weird expression, 13 and 1 day. So the Mishnah Berurah feels the need to interrupt there in source 22 and says, V'yom echad, he says, Lav davka yom, doesn't literally have to be a full day, ela rather, kivan shenichnas tchilat hayom mishnat yudalad, once the beginning of the day of his 14th year has entered, va'afilu shah achat, even 1 hour, va'afilu rega achat, even 1 moment, sagi, it's enough. So as long as you enter into the birthday, so even if the child was born in the afternoon, they can already count as a minyan the night before. So he says, va'afilu nolad b'sof yom Rosh Hashanah, even if the child was only born at the end of the day of Rosh Hashanah, Kivan she'adayin hu vadayom, as long as it was definitely day, na'aseh ben yud gimel shana bitchilat lel Rosh Hashanah shel shnat yudalad. The night before, in the 13th year, you can already count for a minyan. V'im haya ben hashmashot, but then the question is, and this happens a lot, questions with britot, right? What if the child was born ben hashmashot, right? In twilight zone. Be'eit haleida, the birth was between shkia and seit. Dainina leila safek, it's a doubt. But azlina nechumra b'chol davar shumi deraita. And we're machmer with any deraitas that we push off a day. But the Rabbanans, it implies that we can be lenient. So if a person was born bein hashmashot, then it depends on what din we're talking about here. So this is an interesting side point that's brought here regarding the age of 13 is the 13th birthday and not 13 whole years. So it doesn't matter when in the day they were born, they're already an adult from the night. We said that physical maturity matters, and that's discussed in terms of whether you need, basically we need both of these factors as well. Do we need both physical maturity and age? Sometimes you have like these very little bar mitzvah kids who get an aliyah, very blonde and like very, they got no whiskers yet and a very high voice. And the question is that good enough? Meaning, are we assuming that the fact that they've hit bar mitzvah is an indication of that they reach maturity? Or is it enough without having reached physical maturity? So
we don't check.
We don't check. Of course, we don't check. I advise not to get arrested if you check. But we rely on it. So the question is why? What's the sugya that we rely that it's okay? And would that only apply for mitzvot d'Rabbanan like a minyan? But you might not call that 13. I wouldn't call that necessarily that 13-year-old child up to be an aid at a wedding, for example, where a mitzvah d'oraita. Let's look at this.
Refers to that the last 2 lines. He says that.
Where?
He says
that was regarding a suffix as to when he was born, bein hashmashot. But regarding whether somebody's definitely 13, the question is have they reached maturity? There's more of a question. If we look in the Gemara in Nida, source 23, Amar Rava, surely Rava said, in source 23, the Gemara says, Katana shegil echal shnoteha, a girl who's reached her years, in other words, she's become bat mitzvah, she's 12. Eina tzricha bedika. She does not require a physical examination. Here it means in terms of whether or not she's an adult for miyun. Miyun is the halacha of, I'll talk about in a minute. Chazaka havia simanim. We assume that she has, just because she's at the age of 12, that she's reached maturity and she's produced hairs. In other words, this is for the halacha of miyun. Miyun is that mid'oraita, a katana, a child under the age of 12, can be married off by her father. It's called kedushay katana. And the Gemara already in Kedushin Mem Aleph says it's usher to do it. If we don't do it, so no, I get in trouble. Absolutely prohibited to do this. But in ancient times, the father would marry off the daughter. The father had to do it. Now, what if the father was not alive? No, it didn't pass to the brother. That Chazal, they said that you've got this widow. She's got a daughter. She can't marry off her daughter. She can't marry off her daughter because only Kedushay, she's under 12, and the child. The father's not alive, and the child can't marry off herself. So Chazal instituted something called Kiddushay Katana. They instituted a special type of marriage, midrabanan, rabbinic marriage, where the mother and brother can marry her off. It's a rabbinic marriage. But since it's only rabbinic, because midoraita only the father can marry her off, they gave her the option that when she hits the age of 12, when she hits bat mitzvah, she can perform something called miyun, refusal, where she can say, I am now an adult, I'm of sound mind, I refuse this marriage, and the marriage is nullified. So the question is, when do we do the miyun? So the Gemara here is discussing it. We've just seen that when she reaches the age of 12, she can perform the miyun. We don't. It's 12 and a. Oh, she's a naira. She's a naira when she hit. She's naira till 12 and a half. And then she becomes Bulgarian. Bulgaria is 12 and a half. So the question is, the question is, when can she perform the miyun? So we assume we go by the age, we don't go by maturity, and we assume that if she's at the age where she can now refuse, and that it's okay. And if she doesn't refuse, that means she's happy to stay married to him. We go by age, and the age is an indicator for physical maturity, for the fact that she's hit puberty.
Does she have that refusal option if her father is alive?
No.
How long does she have to do
But
it?
she can receive her own get, obviously, once she's 12.
Like once she hits 12, how long does she have to refuse?
It's more or less instant. That's what the Gemara talks about. She's supposed to say, I am now, right, you're 12, I'm now sound minded. And if she continues to decide to live with the husband, that's an indication that she's happy and she's giving her own consent.
So like a day.
What?
So she has to do it that day.
I'm not sure exactly in figures, but something like that. She doesn't reject at the time. But the point for our intensive purposes is, like, obviously we don't do Kedusha Katana, and the Gemara says we don't do it, and it's prohibited to do it in today's day and age. But for our intensive purposes, we see there that the age, the objective age, is supposed to be an indication for maturity. We don't check her. We assume that she's the age, and that's good enough. And therefore, the question is, well, do we apply that to our case? Do we apply that for a minion, for example? A minion, we don't check. So why don't we check? We're just relying on the age. Is that the question here? That we're relying on the age? So let's see what the Beit Yosef says in source 24. So it's the assumption though of the Gemara Rova is that the age is assuming that you reach puberty. In other words, if you've reached the age but you haven't hit puberty, you're not physically developed, then you can't count them for a minion. That's what's implied. But not everyone agrees to this. And the Beit Yosef deals with this in source 24. He says, Umashmer, it implies, She'im lo hevish day sarot, if a person has not developed 2 hairs, Eino mashlim minyan afilu gadol, kama ad sheyetzu rov shnotav she'adi bareshu saris. That if a person has not produced 2 hairs, he cannot, it implies from these sugyot that he cannot join a minyan, even if he's not 13, he's 14, 15, 16, until it's clear that the reason he's not produced hairs because he's a saris, because he's sterile or he has issues in terms of maturity. In other words, the child is supposed to have physical maturity. It's not enough that they're just 13. That's what's implied. However, not everyone agrees. The Maharik disagrees. V'katav Maharik kolon b'shorish mentet, and he wrote Masha katav b'sefer Machkim, quoting the Sefer Machkim, who says the sugya de alma lo avdikach, that the basic practice is not to do this. We do not check. Not only do we not check, we don't ask, right? Hainu, that is lahatzrif stage sarot. We don't require that the child or the 13-year-old has reached maturity. It's enough that we assume that they're 13. Nonetheless, tzarich liot ben yud gimel shana u'divrei hamachkim u'poskim achronim k'varosh uvno ha'Rabbeinu Yaakov patur. In other words, it's enough to be 13. You don't have to. If you hit 13, at least for minyan and things, you do not have to have reached maturity. In other words, it's not an indicator. It's in its own right. It's good enough. We're not assuming because they're 13 that they're just because they're 13, therefore they are they've hit maturity. But rather, even if they didn't have maturity, it'd be enough. But there is a machloket that Pei Yosef has brought.
But in the case of halachically, the physical proof is really, in essence, not required. That we now look at the child. So
Yeah, but the question is, well, what if you know? Is it actually required? That's what we're asking. Is it actually required? Meaning, is the fact that the 13, I'm assuming, therefore they've reached maturity? That's the question here.
But that's precisely what we do.
Well, we do now, but the question is why? Why is it okay to assume that? Why don't we just say, we'll count only people over 50? I don't know, for a minute, whatever it is. But so source 25, because the Shulchan Aruch actually rules that they do have to have maturity based on the other position, not the Maharik. Look in source 25. I'm looking, the time is against us again. But what can I say? Lots of questions, and there's a complicated sugyot here. But in source 25 here, Shulchan Aruch says, "Im lo hevi shtei sa'arot." If a person has not produced 2 hairs, afilu hu gadol b'shanim. Even if he's, he's in terms of years, he's a gadol, he's an adult. Nonetheless, dino kakatan, his halachic status is that of a child. Ad sheyetzu rov shnotav, until he reaches, most of his years. In other words, middle-aged. She'azit bareshu saris. Then it's clear that he's the halachic category of a saris. In which case, it's just that he's got issues with, in terms of he hasn't matured, right? But otherwise it's not allowed. So the Shulchan Aruch, Harry, asks the question, actually rules that no, it's not enough. We're assuming they have 2 hairs. You have to assume they have 2 hairs, but you have to assume they have it. The Ramah disagrees. He says, "Umihu, however, ein medaktakim b'sa'arot." We're not particular to check. Ela rather, kol shehegir l'chal shnotav. Anyone who reaches bar mitzvah age, we give him a chazaka, an assumption, kagadol, that he is an adult. Presumably it's true. So we don't check. The Ramah says we don't check. Shulchan Aruch seems to be more rigid about it. The Ramah says we don't check. We're not medaktik. And this is based on basically the chazaka that he has it. The question is, at which level is the chazaka present? So I guess we'll end just with time. We'll end off with the Mishnah Berurah here, though, in source 26, who says that we don't presume this chazaka in every respect. Only under certain conditions can we rely on this chazaka. So if we look over the page, Mishnah Berurah says that even the Ramah is lenient, it's only with dinei d'Rabbanan, like a minyan. So this is very important. That's why I said the example of a wedding before, like Aiden, because that's d'oraita, you want to get it right. Look at source 26 here. The Mishnah Berurah says as follows: Le'inyan zeh, in this regard. What does that mean that we assume in this regard it's okay? Ritzono lomar, that is to say, le'inyan tefillah shimid rabbanan. In terms of a minyan, which a tefillah, which is only rabbinic, then you can rely on the assumption. Va'afilu l'data poskim, and even those who hold the tefillah he d'oraita, the tefillah is d'oraita, right? The Rambam holds tefillah is d'oraita. Al kol panim, nonetheless, siruf asara lav d'oraita. Even if davening is d'oraita, a minyan is not d'oraita, it's only d'rabbanan. Al kain, therefore, samchina al zeh. Regarding a rabbinic halacha, we rely on this. But amrinam, we say, kivan sheba lichal shnotav, once he's reached years, i.e. he's hit 13, mistama, presumably heavy shtei sarot, he's developed 2 hairs. The rov anashim, because most people, kivan shegi lichal shanim, once they reach the right age, mistama, presumably mevin shtei sarot, they produce 2 hairs. So he says, we're lenient here simply because minyan is d'Rabbanan. Aval, however, le'inyan sharchi v'd'oraita eino moed. Regarding a chiyuv d'oraita, it would not help. We need to know. It's not enough just to assume. And he quotes Ba'im Pri Megadim. Look at the Pri Megadim. Shema'arich bezeh, who goes to great length. Umasik and concludes the mishum to miut hamatzoi. Well, since it's miut hamatzoi, it's a not uncommon minority. Okay, it's not totally unheard of. Al ken, therefore, hichmir midrabanan le'inyan d'oraita. Therefore, Chazal came. Or machme with deraitas, komo le'inyan b'dikat hareya, just like with the reya, that's the lung, that talks about checking the lungs, the way we do checking lungs for a kosher animal, check the animal's not a treifa. But the point is, the Mishnah Berurah says we are lenient, we work on the assumption. The reason we work on the assumption is only because minyan is d'Rabbanan. With the d'Rabbanan, we can rely on this chazak. But typically, we wouldn't rely on it for deraitas.
What about tefillin?
Sorry?
What about tefillin?
What about tefillin?
I mean, do we rely on this cooler to allow a child of 13 to put on 2?
Child's allowed to put, sure, child's allowed to put in even before 30 if they know how to look after them. So that's we'll have to end here because we've got Mariv now, but that we'll end here. We'll continue next time. I'm sorry that we didn't finish the chapter again, but you have to forgive me for that. You got good questions, so I hope it's okay that we took our time with it. Unless people want to sort of catch up for next time, but are we happy to go at this pace as a group rather than catch up? Okay, so if we don't stick to the chapter a week, Seda, we'll be all right. Okay, take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Shakar.